Hello everyone, this is Coley. Today I'm going to be reading Chapter 8 of Demon of Decay's The Asylum. And I'm desperately trying to improve my speech so that I say and less whenever I'm doing an improv part like this. So that's basically everything that I'm going to say, apart from the fact that this chapter is absolutely huge. Man, this is a big chapter. I'm actually kind of a little bit worried about this one, but never mind. Okay, so I just said damn it. Anyway, let's move on. So this is Chapter 8 of Demon of Decay's The Asylum. Everything was just as Twilight remembered it. The dark oaken walls had been sculpted by powerful magics, creating a living structure perfectly suited for work as a library and a house. Her eyes ran over the bright covers of her beloved books that decorated the walls, each one an immaculate shape. The air was rich with the heady scents of paper and books, ink and parchment, learning and life. Beneath them all were the more subtle accents, the reminder of last night's dinner, and the familiar odour of a well-cared-for home. Everything was perfect. Absolutely perfect. The sights, the smells, everything was as she remembered. Even the same patches of dust Spike never quite managed to deal with, which lay undisturbed atop the highest shelves. It was her home, just as it was in her memories. I'm home. 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 Twilight repeated rapidly under her breath. She clutched her sheets tightly to her chest, her breathing growing ragged as she tried to keep from hyperventilating. The warm and gentle caress of the morning sunlight did nothing to fight off the tendrils of ice sliding up her neck. Her frightened eyes dancing erratically around the room. She shivered. I'm home. I'm not at the hospital anymore. Why am I home? This can't be real. Am I free? What happened? Her thoughts raced around her head like a carousel spinning out of control. She struggled to make sense of them all, trying to bring order to chaos. But the questions soon blurred together into a single impenetrable mess of mental confusion. Beneath them all, a single word throbbed with a heartbeat of its own. How? Twilight had always considered herself a scientist. Reason and logic were ideals that she could draw comfort from. They offered reasonable explanations for how the world operated, creating meaning from what would otherwise be anarchy. While others saw the unknown as an impassable wall, she saw the unanswered questions as gateways to further understanding. Every time she dove into a new magical tome, she was helping to pave the way for further discoveries. Most ponies misunderstood Twilight's scholarly ambitions and assumed that she was just a student of magic. It was a common misconception. Magic was the arcane lifeblood of the natural world, but it was only one small aspect of the wider universe. To claim Twilight just studied magic was to claim a painter just studied brushes, or a baker just studied flour. She examined it all, for to properly understand the arcane, she needed to master what it was woven into. Uniting the two brought clarity, revealing the laws and rules that bound everything together. Which is why Twilight Sparkle, chosen student of Princess Celestia and bearer of the element of magic, was frightened by her own home. The rules had been broken. She shouldn't be back in Ponyville. She couldn't be back in Ponyville. Natural law could never be broken. They were inalienable, inviolable, and unchanging. Even Discord had never actually broken the rules. He had subverted them with powerful magics. The ideals of logic and reason that she cherished so much dictated that her presence in Ponyville should be impossible. Twilight found herself floundering as she sought an explanation. Her thoughts were slow and hazy. She turned her head to examine her surroundings as she had done dozens of times before, searching for some clue that she must have been missing. There has to be something here. Everything has a logical answer. Just because I don't have one doesn't prove that there isn't one to be found. She ignored the fog that had settled over her mind, as she began running through possible explanations, considering any illness or curse that she could think of and applying it to her situation. When those failed, the theories she had crafted while back in the hospital were dragged back up to be explained once again, all in the name of due diligence. Even the foes she had defeated over the years were judged, each unlikely candidate discarded as being incompatible with what she knew. Her frustration surpassed fear, as a logical solution continued to elude her. Desperate to find some reason somewhere, the theories grew more complex, rapidly spiraling into the absurd. It was only when she realized that she was seriously pondering the likelihood of changelings utilizing the stolen elements of harmony to bring about the return of Nightmare Moon did Twilight accept the futility of her actions. She groaned in defeat.
I can't. There isn't an explanation for any of this. Why is this happening to me?
Twilight demanded, daring the world to answer her. Silence mocked her. She buried her face in her hooves, her voice dropping to a hoarse whisper.
Nothing makes sense anymore. It's like I'm stuck in a nightmare that just won't end.
She froze.
A nightmare,
she repeated, lifting her head as realization dawned on her. Twilight's fears began to drain away, taking with them the host of ludicrously over-engineered theories she had just been trying to justify.
Of course! Occam's razor! In lieu of any evidence to the contrary, the simplest answer with the fewest assumptions should be accepted. This is all a dream. Wait. Oh, yes! The hospital has to have been the dream. What's the simpler answer? That I had one nightmare, or that all my memories are just fantasies? This has to be real. It's the only answer that makes any sense. Which means, I'm home!
Twilight leapt from her bed with an undignified cry of relief, which was quickly followed by an even more undignified, and equally uncoordinated, dance of joy.
I'm home! Oh, sweet Celestia, I'm really home! Twilight? Are you back already?
Twilight stumbled. Unbalanced by her awkward movements, she barely had time to shout before slamming into the nearest bookshelf and collapsing. Dislodged by the impact, books began raining down upon her, each thump eliciting a soft "oof" from the stunned unicorn.
Twilight!
The voice called again as the soft click of claws upon wooden floors drew closer. Shrugging off her encyclopedia sarcophagus, Twilight lifted herself up on unsteady hooves. Her body hurt, her head was ringing, and everything swayed like a ship in a storm. But Twilight's smile stretched from ear to ear. The moment a purple and green blur entered her fluctuating field of vision, she lunged towards it with all the grace and coordination of a drunkard slipping on a patch of ice. Beating the odds, she managed to connect with her intended target.
Spike!
She shouted as she tackled the surprised dragon. The awkward landing was certainly going to leave a bruise, but she didn't care.
Twilight?
Spike gasped, his warm scales grinding into her fur as she caught him in a massive hug.
What's gotten into you?
She ignored his attempts to free himself, squeezing him even tighter.
Oh, Spike, you don't know how much I've missed you.
Spike blushed as his adopted big sister nuzzled him, increasing his squirming.
Come on, Twilight, that's enough. This is getting embarrassing,
he protested weakly. She responded by crushing him into her coat.
I was so worried. I didn't know what had happened. I was so afraid that I'd never see you all again. And you're squeezing a little tight, Twilight. I was so scared. Everything was wrong. I didn't know what was real. They just... Twilight! Trouble? Breathing? Kept telling me that my whole life was supposed to be a lie. They were saying I made it all up and... Twilight!
Spike shouted hard enough to send a tuft of dragonfire shooting into the air, narrowly missing Twilight's mane. Her grip slackened as she jerked back from the bright flash of green heat, allowing Spike to finally free himself with an audible pop. He tried to give her a stern look as he gasped for air, although it was clearly evident that he was playing up his discomfort.
I love you too, Twilight, but seriously, can we avoid the big death hugs in future? I'm sorry, but I was so relieved to see you, I just couldn't help myself, she apologized happily, beaming down at him. I had this absolutely terrifying nightmare. You don't know how relieved I am to see you. It's good to be home.
Spike brushed some purple hairs from his scales as he looked over at her, concern replacing annoyance once he realized the sheer sincerity in Twilight's voice.
Wow. It must have been a pretty bad nightmare. The absolute worst.
He tapped a claw against his chin thoughtfully.
Was it the one where you forgot to send a letter to the princess? What? No, of course not. Fail a test? No. Show up late to a class? Forget an overdue library book? Break a pinky promise? No, none of those. So it was...
Spike's eyes widened.
Oh, Twilight, I'm so sorry.
He placed a hand on her shoulder.
You haven't had the magic kindergarten nightmare for months. I didn't know. It wasn't anything I had before,
she declared, unable to decide if she was more disturbed by the long list of nightmares she had endured over the years, or the ease in which Spike had been able to run through them all off the top of his head.
It was new. I was in this hospital, and...
Her voice trailed off again as Spike watched her expectantly.
You know what? It's not important. It's over now.
He shrugged.
Okay, whatever you say. I'm a little surprised that you had the time to fall asleep again. I swear I thought you left an hour ago. Oh well, maybe you weren't the only one dreaming stuff up. Breakfast is ready, by the way.
He glanced over at the small mound of fallen books.
So, I guess I should get to work putting these back while you eat.
Twilight shook her head.
Nope. I want my #1 assistant to spend some more time with me right now,
she told him as she affectionately nuzzled his cheek, causing the small dragon to blush again.
The mess can wait, but before we eat, I have a letter to Princess Celestia I need you to send. Really? Is it about the nightmare? Yes, it is,
she said as she trotted down the stairs, making a beeline towards her writing desk.
And it's urgent, too.
He jogged after her.
Doesn't that seem kind of odd? Sending the princess a letter about a nightmare. I mean, it was just a dream.
Twilight hesitated.
It was just a dream, but...
She frowned.
Well, I can't explain it. The dream was so vivid, so real, it was unlike anything I've ever experienced before. What about that door? You know, the one back in the Crystal Empire?
Asked Spike, shivering slightly at the recollection.
That was pretty real. Sombra's spell was different. It used dark magic to draw out your worst fears and create mental illusions to sap your willpower and happiness. However, its power was dependent upon the victim believing in its deceptions. Once you helped free me, I could sense the energy behind the spell. I'm certain I could defeat its illusions if it happened again,
she explained with firm resolve. Twilight gave him a warm smile.
Plus, it doesn't work so well if you have good friends around who care for you. I doubt the world's greatest assistant would leave me stuck in some dark spell for too long. Well, I am pretty awesome,
he said as he puffed out his chest.
So if this was just a nightmare, then why bother Princess Celestia about it?
She sighed.
It might be foolish, but I'm probably still just a little rattled after waking up so suddenly. But I need to send her a message, just in case. Just in case of what? Just in case it wasn't a dream. Just in case there's something else I haven't thought of. Better safe than sorry, after all.
Standing before her desk, Twilight levitated over a blank scroll and lay it out before her, savouring the sensation of using magic once again. It felt odd, after being cut off from her natural unicorn abilities for so long.
Of course, Rainbow Dash always said the same thing about flying whenever she's grounded. You don't miss it until it's not there.
Dipping a quill in some ink, Twilight began addressing her letter with her usual precision.
And she's right. It does come back quickly. It's just something you never forget.
Spike watched her as she set about writing the letter to Princess Celestia. Twilight worked fast, keeping her letter short and succinct. She was eager to send the message as soon as possible. She didn't want to admit it, to Spike or to herself. But she was still afraid. Everything suggested that she was back home. The logical explanation of a nightmare fit all the facts. There was nothing to suggest that she should still be concerned. However, the doubt remained. A stubborn stain in her mind that couldn't be scrubbed away.
Finished,
she declared as she dropped the quill into its container. Rolling up the scroll, she floated it to Spike, who carefully plucked it out of the air. The letter vanished in a flash of green fire, taking with it the heavy concerns that had weighed upon her mind.
There we go. Now all we have to do is wait until we get a response.
Although she knew her fears were irrational, she certainly felt reassured knowing that she had sent the letter.
If I'm right, then later today I'll just end up with dealing with a slightly confused Princess Celestia. If I'm wrong...
Twilight shook her head, halting the thought.
No, don't think about that. You're not wrong. If you're all done, then I guess that means it's time for breakfast,
Spike said. He caught Twilight's stare.
What? I'm hungry. Besides, it's not like we need to stand around waiting right here. We can wait in the kitchen. With the food?
Twilight grinned.
You make a valid argument,
she said, ignoring the sliver of doubt embedded in the back of her thoughts as the pair of them walked towards the kitchen. She wasn't going to let her fears ruin her good mood.
You know, I've been saving up a few gems for a special occasion. I think you deserve a little treat.
With a cry of excitement, Spike raced ahead, licking his lips eagerly. She laughed.
It's good to be home.
The library door swung open behind her.
Spike, I'm home,
a familiar voice called out. Everything stopped. The world was a still life painted by confusion and disbelief.
That voice. No, it's impossible,
thought Twilight as she stared blankly ahead, with her eyes wide with shock. Unable to blink, unable to move, she could only watch as Spike slowly turned around, his face racked with confusion. He glanced behind Twilight and jerked back, his eyes shooting open, as wide as her own.
Oh, it seems we have a guest.
The soft clip-clop of hooves on wood drew closer. The voice's owner was right behind her, but Twilight remained locked rigidly in place.
Spike, my friends are coming over later. Can you get some tea started? Oh, and bring us 2 mugs when you can. I need to have a chat with our visitor.
Spike glanced between Twilight and the other pony. Silently, she begged him not to leave. She didn't want to be left alone with the unseen mare.
Sure,
he finally replied, his eyes continuing to dart between the 2 mares. Slowly, he tiptoed backwards, reaching out behind him as he kept them both in his sights.
I'll be right back.
Spike disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Twilight to face the mare and her terrible voice. The other pony exhaled softly.
Well now, this is a quandary. You see, you're not supposed to be here. This place isn't for you, and you know it too. At the back of your mind, you've been bothered by something you can't quite place your hoof on. Just your mere presence here is a problem. What do you mean?
Twilight croaked. Her mouth was a desiccated wasteland, the lack of moisture making each syllable sting, as it was extracted from her dry lips.
You know what I mean,
the voice said as she circled around Twilight.
Ponyville is a lovely town. It's filled with caring ponies who live happy and productive lives. Families raise their children here. Young lovers stroll together in the park. There are fairs and festivals and contests for every season. It is certainly not the same sort of community that can tolerate the dangerously insane who decide to muck it up. I'm not insane,
said Twilight decisively, cold reminders of her nightmares coming back to chill her bones.
And I'm certainly not dangerous.
She continued to stare ahead, her body still ignoring any command to move. The voice laughed.
Oh, really? There is a problem with your assertions, although you don't want to face it. You are insane, you're just denying it.
Twilight muttered what was left of her courage, fighting to keep from drowning in the rising waters of apprehension and fear.
Prove it. Are you sure you want me to do that?
The invisible mare offered.
You could just close your eyes and leave right now. Wouldn't you feel better if you didn't have to deal with the pain of being proven wrong? Prove it, she repeated firmly. Honestly, you don't have to do this. It's not going to be pleasant. It's going to hurt the more you fight it. I said prove it!
The other mare sighed.
Well, if you insist.
Despite her best attempts to deny it, Twilight had known what was coming. The familiar voice, Spike's reaction, the nagging doubts that had lingered in the back of her mind since she had woken up. She had put the pieces together. Everything had added up to a terrible answer that she hadn't wanted to face, but the other mare trotted into view and halted directly ahead of her. She couldn't avoid it any longer. Twilight was looking at herself. She trembled, her locked joints unable to keep her body from shivering in fear. It was a reflection without a mirror. Her copy stood before her, an insincere look of sympathy etched upon her violet face.
"I told you this would be painful,"
the other Twilight said in her stolen voice. Twilight stared back, unable to voice a response. Inside her frigid chest, her heart beat erratically. Unable to decide if it wanted to go into a fit of hyperactivity or just freeze up like the rest of her. The shadows within the library deepened despite the morning sunlight blazing through the windows, and it added a sinister edge to a familiar world.
"I know you don't want to face the truth, but you can't keep deluding yourself like this. It's just not healthy. You're hurting yourself by holding on to your delusions."
The other Twilight affected a concerned appearance.
"This is my life, not yours. I'm Princess Celestia's prized pupil. I bear the element of magic. It was my friends and I who defeated Nightmare Moon, stopped Discord, halted the Changeling invasion, and saved the Crystal Empire. You're not supposed to be here. This world isn't for you."
Twilight tried to speak, to deny her reflection's ludicrous charges, but her tongue was as frozen as the rest of her.
"I am Twilight Sparkle,"
her duplicate declared firmly. She edged closer, lowering her voice.
"And you? What have you done? You tried to steal my life, copy my accomplishments, and take credit for that which you didn't do." "No,"
whispered Twilight in a pale echo of her twin's confident tone. The imposter's eyes narrowed as some of her false sympathy leaked from her face.
"No? No,"
she repeated a little louder.
"You're right, actually. You have done something else. Something that I haven't done. You've hurt ponies. That is your accomplishment. It's too bad that you're in denial about that as well." "Liar!"
Her affection smirked.
"See? Denial. But then, if I was you, I wouldn't want to remember how much I hurt other ponies either."
She slowly began to circle Twilight like a shark around a wounded fish, slipping out of sight from the still frozen mare.
"You see, that's why you want to be me. I'm the hero. I'm a good friend. I'm always doing my best to help other ponies. You just cause pain,"
she whispered directly into Twilight's ear. The unicorn would have jumped if she wasn't still rooted to the spot. The other mare chuckled as she resumed her slow trot.
"It's an easy theory to prove. After all, just look at how much you're hurting yourself by trying to believe in your protective delusions. But then, I can't understand why you would do such a thing. You hurt yourself with your delusions so that you can avoid the real pain of remembering. I can't blame you for that,"
she continued as she casually finished her circuit, halting herself right in front of Twilight once again.
"I'd make the same choice if I were in your hooves. It hurts less, giving yourself over to the fantasies of living another pony's life. The pain of loss is so much more tolerable than the agony of guilt and shame."
Her expression hardened.
"But that doesn't change the fact that you don't belong here. This place isn't for a pony that brings suffering wherever she goes. Which is what you do. It's about all you do, really." "You're a liar,"
Twilight repeated, feeling her anger rising to the fore.
"Memories? Pain? Whose memories? Who is hurt?"
Her thoughts were caught in a whirlpool, the imposter's words creating a storm of turmoil that threatened to drown her mind beneath waves of conflicting emotions. Twilight grit her teeth as she continued, taking deliberate care with every word.
"I don't hurt other ponies. I don't cause suffering." "Who's the liar now?"
her duplicate said with a cruel laugh.
"I'm struggling to think of anyone in your life you've ever actually helped. This world is one created for ponies who love and cherish one another. You're just a selfish and deluded little monster."
Twilight's retort was interrupted by Spike's return, a steaming mug clutched in each hand. The pungent scent of herbal tea wafted through the air, It was her favourite blend, bringing back memories of long hours spent working at Princess Celestia's side. The thought of her mentor's kind face brought a calming touch to her troubled mind, and she bit back her rage.
Don't lose control. You're better than that. She's just trying to get you upset.
The dragon almost stumbled when he glanced up to find the two mares staring at him with intense expressions. He blinked.
Tea?
He managed to offer with a weak smile.
Excellent. Good job, Spike,
the other Twilight said kindly.
What would I do without my #1 assistant?
Spike gave her a nervous smile as he offered her one of the mugs, looking at Twilight from the corner of his eyes.
Oh, it was nothing,
he said, trying to mask his uncertainty in the presence of the identical unicorns. Twilight flashed her imposter an angry glare as she accepted a cup from Spike.
How dare you talk to Spike like you know him? I raised him. He is my assistant.
Spike turned to make his way towards Twilight, but he was halted when the mug in his hand was levitated out of his grip and floated over to her by her double.
Don't worry, Spike. I'll take care of that. Now you run along and make sure that there's enough for the others when they arrive.
For a moment, Twilight thought he was going to protest, his mouth flapping open and shut a few times.
Are you sure you don't need me?
Asked Spike when he stared at Twilight, something unreadable hidden behind his emerald eyes.
No, we'll be fine. Don't worry about us. We just have some things we need to discuss. We have some hay fries in the icebox I could reheat,
he offered, edging a little closer to Twilight.
Spike!
The other Twilight stated his name forcefully, pulling his attention back to her.
We are fine. All we need now is a little privacy. Understood?
Spike nodded meekly and hurried back to the kitchen. Twilight's loathing of her imposter reached new depths. She pawed at the floor in a subconscious display of aggression, the white-hot hate burning in her chest, melting the doubt that had frozen her muscles. She knew the princess would disapprove of her losing control of herself and resorting to violence. But that didn't make the idea of bucking her twin in the face any less delicious.
That's better,
the other Twilight stated as she watched Spike's purple tail disappear around the corner. She turned back to Twilight, floating the mug closer to the scowling unicorn's head.
Go on, have some tea. I know you'll like it.
She took a sip from her own mug as encouragement.
See? It's good. It will help you to calm down.
Bristling at the implication that she needed to be calmed down, Twilight telekinetically yanked the mug free from her double's mental grasp, splashing tea onto the floor. She stared daggers at her alternate, as she fought to rein in her temper.
How dare you speak to Spike like that?
Please, don't start, she said scornfully. Twilight ignored her.
How dare you speak to Spike like you know him? Like you have any right to tell him what to do?
Her voice was low and dangerous, like a viper coiled in the grass. Her imposter rolled her eyes.
Just drink your tea,
she snapped, taking a sip from her own mug.
We have a lot to discuss, you and I, and it's for the best if we are all in control of our emotions.
She lifted an eyebrow as she gave Twilight a cocky grin.
And we don't want any pony to do something crazy, now do we?
Silence descended upon the two mares. Twilight's muscles continued to clench and release as she held herself back from lunging at the imposter.
Stay in control. Violence won't solve anything. She is just trying to get a rise out of you so that she can make a point. Prove her wrong.
Lifting the mug to her lips and resisting the urge to hurl the steaming contents into the other mare's smug face, she took a reluctant sip. The familiar taste washed over her tongue, bringing with it some of the fondest memories of her life. As much as she wanted to, she couldn't deny that the tea was soothing.
But I still hate her,
she added firmly, her steely gaze burrowing into her opposite's eyes. She continued to sip her drink, content to let the awkward quiet continue indefinitely. Twilight considered it a minor victory when her imposter was the first to break the silence. Clearing her throat, the other Twilight began to speak.
Yes. So, I know you're probably very confused right now, and probably pretty angry, but you need to understand something. This life, she gestured at the library, is mine. I'm Twilight Sparkle. I have friends I adore, and they love me back. We would do anything for each other, and that means dealing with threats. And you are most certainly a threat.
Twilight scowled.
They're my friends, not yours. You're just some pony, some thing that has taken what is mine and twisted it around, claiming that I'm the thief. I've seen through your illusions, and with my help, my friends will see through them too, said Twilight with a strong grin. It's good to hear you sounding so confident, the other Twilight mused. My friends will be here shortly, and you'll have an opportunity to show us all. I'll prove it to them, Twilight said before taking another sip, trying to match her reflection's unconcerned attitude. After all, they're my friends.
The imposter snorted into her tea.
Well, if that's the case, then why do you seem so determined to hurt them? A real friend wouldn't just selfishly use the other pony, leaving them in pain and tears. I don't do that, she snapped, the bonds holding back her temper growing frayed and worn. I don't go around hurting other ponies either. I take care of my friends. I would never hurt them. Never!
The other mare laughed, arrogance and savage amusement transforming Twilight's voice into something completely alien.
Please, you can't honestly believe that. Don't you remember what you did to Pinkie Pie?
Twilight flinched at her friend's name, eliciting another round of cruel laughter. She glared at her tormentor, hiding her doubt and shame behind a mask of bitter anger. She had hurt Pinkie Pie, but that didn't make her some uncaring beast. She narrowed her eyes.
That life isn't real. It's an illusion, a fantasy. This is my real life.
Her voice dropped to a whisper.
And I want it back. I won't let you steal what is mine and get away with it. You're the one who's trying to steal the lives of others,
the other Twilight said.
You would rather take the life that you didn't live than face the shame and guilt of what you have done in your own. You're like a tornado, leaving nothing but loss and devastation in your wake. Your friends, your family, and even total strangers who just happen to get in the way. No pony is safe around you. Stop lying!
Twilight shouted, as she took a threatening step towards her.
That's all you do! Lie! Lie and try to mess with my head. Everything you're saying now, it's just meant to confuse and distract me. I'm not going to fall for it again.
She jabbed an accusatory hoof at her twin.
I've dealt with you before. It was you in the bathroom mirror. You were there to destroy my willpower and try and convince me that I was insane, so that I would just give up and accept the prison you created for me. Well, it didn't work. I'm still here, and I'm going to defeat you.
The other Twilight sighed.
I'm frankly disappointed with you. I hoped that you would possess some mental acuity to realize that you're just being irrational and senseless. I thought if we talked, you might accept the inevitable and give up on your delusions. But it seems that you are too stubborn to see the truth. There is nothing irrational about this, she growled. The evidence is there, in my mind, and in my senses. I'm not being stubborn, I'm standing up for the truth. I'm standing up against you.
Twilight stumbled slightly, but corrected herself, forcing herself to take another aggressive step forwards.
You are not going to win. Once my friends arrive, once the elements of harmony are here, we will show you just how powerful true friendship is.
The lack of any worry in her imposter's face only heightened Twilight's anger.
You're just setting yourself up for more disappointment,
she told Twilight, a whisper of amusement sparkling in her eyes.
But then, it is for the best. Your delusions are not healthy for any pony, and you need to accept that this life isn't yours. It won't be pleasant, but you need a voice that you can trust to tell you that you're sick.
She gestured past Twilight.
So, why don't we ask my friends what they believe?
Twilight glanced over her shoulder. As if on cue, the door to the library swung open, revealing 5 familiar mares. She sighed with relief as they strode into the library, their mere appearance enough to bolster her confidence. Those were the friends she remembered.
Now you're for it,
she told her doppelganger, giving the other unicorn a bold smirk before turning back to her friends. The words of greeting on her tongue died, as her best friends drew up in a loose semicircle around her. There was recognition in their gaze, yes, but the warm compassion that she had been expecting was painfully absent. Instead of friendship, there was anger, embarrassment, and disgust. 5 sets of cold eyes judged Twilight, sapping her courage and leaving her speechless.
"Is this here imposter still giving you trouble, Sugar Plum?"
asked Applejack.
Yes.
Both Twilights answered as one.
"I wasn't talking to you,"
she snapped at Twilight.
"Didn't you learn better than to come back to Ponyville?"
interjected Rainbow Dash as she hovered just off the ground, staring at Twilight like she was something the Pegasus needed to scrape off her hoof.
"Seriously, what is your problem? We told you you're not welcome around here. What, do you want us to make you leave? Huh?"
She flew a little closer to Twilight, her forelegs raised in an aggressive display.
But it's me, Twilight. Twilight Sparkle,"
she said as ice formed in the pits of her stomach.
But it's me, Twilight. Twilight Sparkle,"
she said as ice formed in the pit of her stomach. She gestured desperately at the other mare.
"She's the imposter. I'm your friend." "No pony likes a fibber,"
said Pinkie Pie with a reproachful look.
"Don't be absurd, you little monster. How dare you impugn the character of our good friend by claiming to be her?"
Rarity lifted her snout dismissively.
"It's disgraceful, having some mad mare spreading such slander in public."
Applejack nodded. "It's just straight up dishonesty, that's what it is."
"We don't want you here. This isn't your home. You've worn out your welcome."
Twilight slowly backed away from the approaching ponies, wincing with every cutting declaration. The empty teacup tumbled to the floor as she struggled to speak.
Please, you can't. But why don't you believe me?"
she stammered, her frightened eyes darting from one face to another, seeking any hint of affection in her friend's eyes. There was nothing.
"Fluttershy!"
Twilight nearly shouted, focusing her watery gaze on the one mare that hadn't said anything yet. Unlike the anger in the faces of the others, the shy Pegasus just looked nervous and uncomfortable. Desperate hope flared up within Twilight's chest.
"Please, Fluttershy, say that you know it's me. Please say you recognize me."
Fluttershy averted her eyes, doing her best to hide her face behind her pink mane.
I think,"
she whispered softly, nibbling on her lower lip.
I think you should stop trying to pretend you're, some pony you're not. It's not very nice. No, not you too. Please, Fluttershy, not you. You're just ill and, need some help to get better. No.
Twilight shook her head, her cheeks glistening with her tears. The loud and angry denouncements from her other friends had been hard blows against her confidence, each one landing with a nearly physical impact that left her reeling. Fluttershy's soft rebuttal, however, was a jagged knife that plunged straight into her breast. Her hope was snuffed out like a candle, leaving nothing to hold back the darkness within that threatened to consume her. She felt like she was being crushed down against the wooden floor as the other ponies continued to force her backwards, her world shrinking around her. She spun around to face her imposter, her tear-streaked face gnarled and twisted with rage.
"You! This is all your fault. You're twisting their minds. You're controlling them somehow. Like..."
Her wet eyes widened with realization.
"Like when Cadence had been replaced with a changeling."
The other Twilight groaned.
"All right, I'll admit that it was funny at first, listening to you try and rationalize your delusions. But now it's just pathetic. Stop embarrassing me in front of my friends. All right, I'll admit that it was funny at first, listening to you try and rationalize your delusions. But now it's just pathetic. Stop embarrassing me in front of my friends. They're my friends."
Twilight howled, her horn bursting into life.
"I've had enough of your lies. This ends now."
She ignored the fear on her friends' faces as they shied away from the purple aura, her attention focused on her twin sitting yards away. The arcane power washed away the chill of doubt like a warm bath as she set about forming the complex spell. A lesser mage would find it challenging. For Twilight, it was almost second nature. She had practiced it furiously after her brother's wedding, knowing that one day she might need to utilize it. She narrowed her eyes dangerously.
I know what you are, changeling.
A beam of lavender fire lanced from the tip of her horn and engulfed her tormentor. A second sun was born in the middle of the library, the blinding flash of its fleeting existence accompanied by a thunderclap strong enough to shake the foundations of the library. Twilight struggled to remain standing in the aftermath, as the tremors sent books sailing into the air. She grinned, as she furiously blinked away the spots dancing in her vision, eager to see her handiwork.
Okay, that was a little more powerful than I had intended,
she admitted, letting out a giddy laugh.
But it's fine. Fine. Now my friends will know the truth.
Still sporting a broad smile, she turned her attention to the other mares, impatient to see the look of realization on their faces once they understood that she had once again saved them from a changeling infiltrator. Her smile slipped when she caught sight of them all, each one in a state of disarray and confusion.
My stars,
hollered Applejack, as she rubbed at her eyes.
I can't hardly see.
The farm pony blindly groped about around her, attempting to locate the hat that had been blown off her head. Fluttershy helped Rainbow Dash up off the floor, fussing over a large bump on her head. The prismatic mare reassured her that she was fine, giving Twilight a venomous glare. Reluctantly, Fluttershy left Dash's side and turned her attention to the whimpering Pinkie Pie, who lay where she had fallen, her hooves protectively wrapped over her eyes. Twilight gulped, her dread returning with a wave of dizziness. Guilt began gnawing at her heart, but she pushed her doubts aside.
I'll apologize afterwards. They'll understand it had to be done.
Ignoring their dirty looks, she gestured at where the imposter had been standing.
See? I told you she wasn't...
She stiffened, her voice trailing away as she stared at where she was pointing.
You were saying?
The other Twilight said with a smirk. Twilight's eyes were locked onto her twin. The spell she had cast could defeat any illusions. She had expected to find a changeling drone before her, perhaps even a fully fledged queen. Instead, she was still staring at a perfect copy of herself. Her reflection's smile faded.
Now, I think you owe every pony an apology,
she said, the humour disappearing from her face as she took a few steps forwards.
It's not nice to go around hurting other ponies. Just like it's not very nice to lie about someone in front of their friends, either. No, this is impossible,
Twilight shouted.
You're a changeling. You have to be. It explains why all of my friends don't realize who I am. That's why they believe that.
Her desperate rant was cut short when a pair of white legs grabbed her head and painfully yanked it around, leaving her staring into Rarity's furious eyes.
What were you thinking, pulling a horrible stunt like that? You could have seriously hurt some pony.
She shouted into Twilight's face. The normally demure pony transformed into a burning avatar of righteous indignation.
Didn't you consider what could have happened? I
stammered Twilight weakly, as she tried to pull back. She was desperate to escape her friend's angry gaze, but the other unicorn's hooves held her head like a vice as she continued to scream at her.
Don't you even care about any pony else? Or are you just so selfish that you just don't care who you end up hurting? You monster!
The look in Rarity's eyes frightened her. It wasn't the look of a drama queen trying to play up her emotions. It was pure, honest rage on her friend's face. Something she had never seen before. Twilight's mouth flapped uselessly, trying and failing to find something that she could say to her.
This wasn't supposed to happen. Something went wrong. Why didn't the spell work? Rarity, that's enough,
the other Twilight said, resting a restraining hoof on her shoulder. She glanced back at her, biting back her anger.
But she...
The imposter shook her head.
It's fine. Go check on Pinkie Pie.
She turned her attention to Twilight.
I'll make sure that she behaves herself.
Rarity held her grip for a few more seconds before reluctantly releasing Twilight, letting the disheveled unicorn slump to her knees.
Fine, but if she hurts any pony else, then the next time I won't be so polite.
Lifting her nose into the air, she stormed away, leaving the two Twilights alone together. Twilight watched Rarity move to the still downed Pinkie Pie, her cheeks still aching from her painful grip. It was obvious how they felt, but she didn't want to believe. She wanted to claim that it was just her mind toying with her again. The denials didn't work. She could see it in the way their lips tightened and their eyes narrowed whenever they glanced in her direction.
My friends hate me.
She averted her gaze as she lifted herself up into a seated position, unable to look at them any longer.
Why are you doing this to me?
Twilight whispered, her voice cracking.
Why are you stealing my life? I'm not doing anything.
The impostor gestured around her.
You did all this yourself. I told you that they weren't your friends, but you wouldn't accept it. I told you that you just hurt other ponies, but you wouldn't listen. But I don't... What do you call that?
She interrupted, pointing at where Fluttershy was bandaging the cut on Rainbow Dash's head. The normally quiet and conciliatory Pegasus was watching Twilight, carefully eyeing her from beneath her pinkish mane, like she was an animal that could attack without warning.
Or that,
she gestured again, motioning towards Rarity as she bent down to help Pinkie Pie to her hooves, her purple hair bristling with contained fury. Twilight's head swam, her thoughts growing foggy and indistinct. Opening her mouth to speak, she found her words lost as she choked back another round of sobs. She lowered her eyes in shame, a growing puddle of tears glistening between her hooves. Her temper gnashed its teeth in frustration, raging against her growing sense of hopelessness. It didn't want to give up. The source of her suffering was right beside her, within easy striking distance. It demanded she attack. It demanded she act. It demanded she do something to end her suffering.
What's the point?
She fired back, a cold despondency settling over her thoughts. Her senses felt muffled. Colours were washed out and faded. Sounds reached her as if crossing a great distance. It was as if there was a dreary rainstorm inside her, scouring away her strength and leaving her gutted.
What's the point in continuing to fight against the inevitable?
The other Twilight said, mirroring her own thoughts. A half-filled mug of lukewarm tea levitated before her face.
Go ahead and drink up. It will help to calm you down,
she cooed, her rich voice reaching deep into her head. Twilight nodded dumbly as she reached out to take the cup from the air, her arms trembling. For some reason, she couldn't even call upon her magic to hold the cup. But this didn't bother her. She sniffled.
I never wanted to hurt anyone. Of course you didn't,
the sibilant voice hissed sympathetically.
You can't help it. It's not your fault. It's just who you are. But this world isn't meant for you. Now drink your tea like a good girl.
There was something tickling the back of Twilight's mind, a voice quiet enough to be lost beneath a breeze. She ignored it as she stared into her tea. Its surface rippled like a pond in a rainstorm, her tears dripping from her chin.
I just want this to end. So do they.
Twilight lifted her gaze and recoiled, alarmed to find her friends arrayed around her. Each one wore an expression that drove claws of self-loathing deeper into her spine. They were all different, 5 unique displays of how worthless and despicable she really was. Rainbow Dash's face was etched with a furious scowl that matched her outspoken temperament. Applejack glared distrustfully from beneath the brim of her dusty hat, looking like she had caught Twilight trying to steal apples. Having regained her composure, Rarity's slight frown expressed a mild displeasure that only masked the burning anger in her eyes. Unlike the others, Pinkie Pie looked more disappointed than angry. her normally bubbly personality punctured by a sense of betrayal. Growing more desperate with each terrible rejection, she shifted her gaze to the last mare. Twilight blanched when she met Fluttershy's gaze. The unicorn's knees trembled, nearly sending her crashing back to the floor. Pity. There wasn't a hint of the other's naked hatred or raw distrust in Fluttershy's soft blue-green eyes. She was staring at Twilight like she would a bird with a lame wing.
She isn't angry. She thinks you're a cripple. She looks at you and sees a hurt animal. She feels sorry for you.
Twilight shriveled beneath that soft gaze, gasping loudly as she struggled to breathe. She wished Fluttershy would just hate her like the others. It was easier to take. How could she claim that she wasn't ill? That this really was her life when her friend looked at her with nothing but pity and sadness?
They don't want you here. No pony does,
her twin stated, thankfully drawing Twilight's unsteady gaze away from her friend's judging eyes.
You're not Twilight. You're not their friend. This isn't your life. They don't need some pony like you around. You just hurt other ponies. You don't belong here.
You're not our friend, repeated Applejack scornfully.
We don't need you around,
Rarity added.
You're not wanted here. You just hurt other ponies. You don't belong here.
Each friend repeated one of her twin's lines, their words landing like hammer blows against her sanity. Her doubts and insecurities rose to the forefront of her mind as the other ponies continued to chant their lines, the cruel barbs digging deeper into her psyche. Fed by her shame, her thoughts began to echo their words, her mind tearing at itself like a wolf gnawing at a trapped limb. Her mouth worked uselessly. She wanted to shout, she wanted to beg, she wanted to plead, to cry, to try and explain. She wanted to say something, to deny everything, but only managed an incoherent mess of immature sobbing. The world was closing in around her, rooting her to her spot in the library floor. She couldn't breathe. Her friends' faces were so familiar yet so alien. They were just as she remembered, only twisted with looks of hatred that seemed far out of place. She would have given anything to have them regard her with some affection and love from her memories. Unable to meet their harsh gaze any longer, she turned away, focusing her blurred vision upon her twin. Her reflection stared back. The corners of her mouth lifted into a cruel grin.
Drink your tea. Give up. Let me take the pain away,
she said, her quiet words reaching past the harsh voices of the other mares. A purple aura sprang to life at the end of her horn, promising relief.
Please,
she moaned pathetically. Her eyes locked onto the unicorn's glowing horn. She just wanted it to end. She didn't care how. She just needed it to stop.
Please, I can't.
There was a soft pressure within Twilight's skull, noticeable even beneath the dizziness and fog and emotional torment that had transformed her thoughts into a jumbled mess. It was the subtle probe of another consciousness trying to pry open her mind.
I can make it stop hurting. All you need to do is let me in,
the imposter hissed, as the pressure increased. It was uncomfortable, feeling the touch of another's mind upon her own, but Twilight felt compelled to agree. She needed relief, and the other Twilight's words offered the only way to end her pain.
Drink your tea and relax, and I'll make it all go away.
Twilight nodded weakly, her muscles struggling to keep her seated body upright. Everything felt soft, like the world was crafted from clay. The shadows in the library deepened like a black ooze that was seeping from the walls.
Yes, but please, make it stop,
she thought, trying to ignore the persistent itch in the back of her mind that clamoured for attention. Slowly, she lowered her mental defenses, letting the velvet touch of her double's magic slip into her thoughts.
Just make it end. Please, take the hurt away.
The other Twilight's grin grew wider as her eyes flashed with purple energy.
I promise I'll make it all better. You won't feel anything soon.
Twilight returned the smile weakly, taking hope in the promise of a reprieve. She didn't want anything but peace. Her friends continued their litany of her failures and personal flaws, but it had lost its sting. Assured that she wouldn't suffer any more, she found the willpower to ignore them.
They've abandoned me anyway. I just want them to go away.
Her head lolled about as arcane tendrils wormed through her brain. Everything went blurry. The violation of her mind was painful, but it was a blessed relief when compared to the hatred and disappointment in her friends' faces. Her eyes drifted away from the other Twilight and her sharp smile.
Everything's so black,
she considered idly, watching as the darkness flowed like liquid from the nooks and crannies of the library. It was a voracious shadow, swallowing up everything she could see as it slowly drew closer.
Drink your tea.
Twilight couldn't tell if she had heard the command or if she had thought it, but she obeyed regardless, doing her best to try and force her foreleg to respond. Her body felt cold, her muscles slow to react. A flicker of movement past her leering reflection drew Twilight's uncoordinated gaze as she tried to lift her cup to her slack lips. She turned her head as her vision swam in and out of focus. It was hard to make it out. The object lost in distant shadows. It seemed unimportant, whatever it was, but that nagging sensation demanded she look closer. Twilight blinked a few times as she cleared some of the tears away, her vacant grin replaced by a frown as she finally made out the purple and green object half hidden in the darkness. The cup of tea froze against her lips.
Spike?
The young dragon was peering out from the kitchen doorway, looking at the group with a look of concern on his face.
No, none of the group,
she thought. The itching at the back of her mind grew more pronounced.
He's looking at me. He's worried about me. He's worried for me.
Drink your tea, the command repeated more forcefully.
She can take the pain away. She can make it all stop,
she reminded herself, her friends' voices growing louder in her ears, their hatred and loathing dripping from every syllable. You don't belong here.
You're not our friend. You just hurt other ponies.
The cup sank a fraction of an inch.
Spike? He doesn't hate me,
she considered, as she met his gaze. Her mind flashed back to Pinkie Pie's sadness and Fluttershy's pity, but it wasn't the same. This time, she could see something there, a sense of familiar recognition in his eyes.
He's worried. Not about what I might do, but about what might happen to me. He cares. He cares about me. He cares about me.
Drink your tea. The world around her rippled like liquid as Twilight slammed shut her mind, severing the cold tendrils that had been digging around inside her skull. The shadows pulled back like a wild animal from a burning torch.
Spike cares about me. Spike loves me. Spike is still my friend.
Each thought brought back with it a small burst of honest relief, hope blooming once again within her nearly broken mind. The world seemed to wake up from a despondent sleep, the colours growing sharper and the sounds becoming crisp to her ears. She had slipped out from beneath her melancholy prison, and she could finally see the world for what it was once again. Her unleashed anger joined her newfound hope in washing away her despair, scouring away the taint of self-loathing that had seeped into her soul. A renewed fire burned in her chest as she leapt to her hooves and tossed the mug to the floor. Drawing strength in her resistance, Twilight lifted her chin to meet the opposite's gaze. There was a moment's alarm when she finally managed to make out the imposter's face. But the shock was banished by a powerful surge of righteous fury. Her eyes narrowed into dangerous slits.
You!
The other unicorn's eyes twinkled with amusement as she smiled at Twilight. It was the same smile from the bathroom mirror. The corners of the mare's mouth were pulled back around the sides of her face, her grin stretching from ear to ear, and bisecting her head almost completely. It was an unnatural wound that cut almost completely through her skull. There was far too many teeth on display in her twisted maw, each one shining like an ivory dagger in the morning light. It was a noxious smile, an impossible smile, and it seemed to grow larger the longer Twilight stared at it.
"You're going to regret this mistake,"
the thing declared, its body a grotesque mockery of Twilight's form, its smile twisted into a cruel sneer.
"Things would have been so much easier for you if you had just surrendered to the inevitable." "I will not surrender to you,"
she shouted back, letting her anger grow out of control, using it to help power her resistance.
"You failed. I didn't break, and I still know that my friends love me."
"Oh? Is that so?"
The question came from 6 mouths at once. Twilight spun her head around to face the other mares before recoiling in shock, each one wearing identical expressions, and examining her with equally vacant eyes. She stumbled backwards as her friends advanced on her, their empty expressions not matching the aggressive body language. Her hindquarters bumped against a bookshelf, cutting her off from escape. They drew closer, pinning her against the wall. At some unspoken signal, they halted as one, her friends watching her through unseeing eyes.
"We don't love you. No pony loves you,"
they announced together.
"You're just a mad dog they should have put down a long time ago."
"Let them go,"
she shouted, her limbs trembling again as she gave the other Twilight her strongest glare. She couldn't back down. She had to be strong, for her friends. She took a step closer, trying to make herself as intimidating as possible.
"If you don't let them go right this instant, you'll do what?"
It spat, cutting her off with a chorus of stolen voices.
"You can't do anything.
You're nothing but a monster.
No matter how much
You're nothing but a deluded
fraud.
fraud.
You're not our friend."
Twilight rose to her full height, fighting to keep her voice steady.
"I'm warning you."
Wet, gurgling laughter filled the library.
"Oh, this is rich. You're a pathetic failure trying to sound competent."
The humor vanished instantly, replaced by a cold seriousness.
"You can't intimidate me. I know the truth. You're not the element of magic. You've never trained a Celestia's side. Your past is a fabrication. A lie. It's all a fantasy crafted by an unstable little filly who couldn't deal with her own life. You are just the product of a young unicorn who would rather escape into a world of foolish dreams and storybook endings than face the pain of her memories."
The thing with the monstrous mouth sniffed slightly, affecting an offended air.
"I was just trying to offer you a way out, you know. A way to end the pain without all this drama. But you rejected me."
It smirked.
"So now you get to suffer."
Twilight's horn burst into life, illuminating the walls around her with a pale purple glow.
"You're a liar,"
she growled. Her headache pounded like a drum within her skull, too powerful to be masked by the cloying fog that had settled over her mind. She shook her head, clearing her thoughts.
"Nothing you say is true. Can you honestly expect me to believe anything you say after spending so long pretending to be me? You're insane if you think I'm going to listen to you whilst you're controlling my friends." "I'm not controlling your friends at all. These," it gestured at the other mares, each one echoing its words,
"Are not your friends. This world is not your world. You don't belong here. This is a world for a talented unicorn that has dutifully studied beneath Princess Celestia, one who does all she can for her friends and tries her best to help others."
Her friend started to laugh as the thing that had been wearing her face continued to speak.
It is not for some delusional nutcase who poses a danger to herself and those around her. It's not for a selfish man who uses those around her to suit her own needs.
I have studied with the princess. I do help others.
This is a world for the bearer of the element of magic.
I am the element of magic.
Twilight shrieked, her nostrils flaring as she slammed a hoof on the floor, the magical aura swelling in power as she drew in extra energy, ready to cast a spell at a moment's notice. Sweat glistened on her brow as her headache grew as well, her skull caught in a vice. The laughter halted instantly, 6 pairs of eyes judging Twilight in sudden silence.
Prove it,
they demanded flatly. Twilight blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift in tone.
What?
She finally managed to ask, sounding as confused as she was suspicious.
I said prove it. Go on,
it said as it gestured at her.
I'm standing right here, completely defenseless. You believe you were taught a few spells for self-defense, which is certainly not something that they would have taught you if you were actually crazy. So, if you can properly use one of those spells that you thought you learned at the princess's side, I'll go away forever.
Pony feathers,
she scoffed, keeping her horn lit in case it tried to pull anything.
You're a liar. You'd never do anything you said that you would, even if I were inclined to trust you in the first place.
It only smirked.
You don't need to trust me. Here I am.
It lifted its head and tossed its mane back, striking a noble pose, an effect ruined by the ragged gash it called a mouth.
This is your chance. I have no defenses up. I have no spells ready to cast. You can defeat me and vindicate yourself. Right here, right now.
It smirked at her.
This is your opportunity to become the hero you always pretended to be. This is your chance to be the real Twilight Sparkle.
She stared back at it, trying to hold back the mental fog and keep herself alert.
It's a trick,
she said eventually. It frowned.
A trick?
Of course it's a trick. I'm not stupid. What, did you think I would just blindly do your bidding?
Twilight glanced at her friends, each one wearing the same frown as her reflection.
Besides, how can I be sure that my friends will be safe?
You can't, its smirk returned.
But you really don't have any choice in the matter. I've already indulged your delusions longer than necessary. This world, this life, isn't for you. So either you defeat me right now, or I send you back to your real life, so you can suffer with your guilt and shame.
Twilight hesitated again, her eyes running over the faces of her puppeted friends. She knew it was lying to her, and couldn't be trusted. It was a ruse, some sort of trap that she hadn't discerned just yet.
Do I have a choice?
She asked herself, a sense of resignation settling over her. She continued to draw and release energy, keeping her horn primed for emergencies.
It's right. I have to defeat it if I want to stand any chance of saving my friends. They are depending on me. They need me. I'm their only chance.
Twilight felt a warmth settle into her breast as she stared down her nightmarish reflection.
But,
she thought, opening her mouth as if to speak,
that doesn't mean I have to play by its rules.
Twilight's aura flared with power as she began weaving the arcane threads together into an elaborate shape of an imprisonment spell, her mind calling back to the many years spent studying with her beloved princess. Such spells were advanced, and as advanced as they were carefully regulated. A spell meant to harmlessly imprison another pony for an indefinite period of time was not something one could learn out of a school spellbook. Princess Celestia had stressed the importance of restraint and responsibility when she had taught it to Twilight, the pair of them working together in one of the castle's great halls.
If there was ever a time, it was now.
It would only take moments to cast, but she worked quickly, hoping to finish the spell before the other Twilight could respond. Invisible to the naked eye, lines of eldritch force were bent to her will, forming the complex geometric shape necessary for a successful spell. The air buzzed with electricity as she drew upon the power of the world around her.
Something is wrong.
Twilight's eyes shot open as her spell began to unravel at the seams. It was fighting her control. The individual threads twisting away from her mental grasp. The connections were not lasting. The lines of power pushing apart like magnets of the same charge. Exactly what happens when a spell is being cast incorrectly.
No! The spell is right!
In a panic, she drew more power into herself, trying to force the spell to comply. She could picture it perfectly in her head, the precise shapes and runes that the princess had taught her in person. Twilight grit her teeth as her horn hummed with the pressure of containing so much energy. The more she pushed, the greater the resistance. She didn't care. The spell was right. She could manage the strain. She knew it would work if she could just... The spell burst apart like an overinflated party balloon, unable to sustain the power she was throwing at it. Like an invisible bolt of lightning drawn into an iron rod, the uncontrolled energy shot down her horn and burrowed it deep into her forehead, like a spear of burning agony. Her mind flashed white as she toppled soundlessly onto the floor, her muscles jerking and twitching erratically as her nervous system was overloaded. Twilight came to a few heartbeats later, staring up at the ceiling of the library. Her entire body ached from the involuntary workout. Her hair was frazzled and stood on end. Her back teeth tingled. She was lucky she hadn't really hurt herself. She groaned, not feeling particularly lucky.
What happened? Why didn't that spell work?
Twilight tried to sit up, managing to lift her head before her strength gave out and her body went limp. She fell back against the oaken floor with a louder groan. She had to move. She had to get up. A shadow passed over Twilight's eyes as 6 faces leaned in over her, filling her field of vision with their mocking grins. Her friends continued to smile as her grotesque imposter tutted disdainfully.
Well, well, well. That didn't go as expected, now did it?
What did you do?
Twilight gasped as she strained out the words.
Me? I did nothing. I just let you prove my point for me, it said, prodding her chest with a single hoof. This world isn't meant for you. Your life is nothing but delusions and fantasy held in place by shameful desperation.
No, you did something,
Twilight shouted, confidence wavering as she struggled to right herself.
I know it. You had to do something. I cast it just like I remembered. I cast that spell perfectly.
Her reflection planted its hoof onto her chest, pinning her in place as it lowered its head close to her own.
Now you see why you are so dangerous,
it hissed, spittle dripping from its hideous wound of a mouth. Twilight twisted her head to the side, fighting back her nausea as the warm liquid splattered onto her face.
You think you have the skills and talents you just don't have. It's a cruel cycle, really. Your delusions are what led you to hurt ponies in the first place, and then you ended up creating more delusions so you could hide from your guilt. But that just left you even less capable of acting responsibly, meaning you are more liable to hurt ponies in the future.
It chuckled.
Your life reads like a playwright's tragedy.
Twilight glanced around wildly as she began sliding into panic. She was surrounded. She was trapped. She was in danger and she was defenseless. A sense of powerful claustrophobia gripped her heart, sending her heartbeat racing upwards. Her body was weak and unresponsive, unable to even remove the hoof compressing her chest. Her magical abilities had failed her. Any attempt to pull power back into her abused horn elicited another stabbing pain directly into her brain.
Why didn't it work? Why can't I cast the spell?
The thoughts echoed like the tolling of some great bell, the reverberations shaking her to her very core. It didn't make any sense. She had trained hard to master that spell. Hours had been spent practicing, on her own and under the princess's direct guidance. She could remember Princess Celestia's proud grin when she had finally managed to bind the limbs of the helpless guard assisting them. The doubt that had been rising and receding all morning like the ocean's tides crashed back down upon her, drowning her mind in uncertainty. She could remember so many moments with her beloved mentor, the memories of time spent studying beneath Princess Celestia's gentle guidance, crisp and clear. Yet she found herself turning a critical eye upon them, judging them with a reluctant skepticism.
Was any of it real? Is it all just a big fantasy? Is my whole life one giant lie?
She whimpered as she fought back against the insidious thoughts, driving them away with what little strength she could muster.
I won't give in,
she grunted, the hoof on her chest keeping her from drawing in a full breath.
I won't surrender.
It doesn't matter what you think,
the grotesque mare spat, her nightmarish visage hovering inches above the trapped unicorn. Twilight gagged as she was assaulted by the sickly aroma of putrefaction, but it ignored her discomfort.
You're not supposed to be here. This is a life meant for a Twilight Sparkle that has compassion and looks beyond her own selfish needs. You are not that mare. You are not Twilight Sparkle. Your memories are lies. You've proven that yourself. Everything you think the princess taught you are just worthless fantasies forged by an unstable mind.
Unable to meet that horrible smile, she twisted her head to one side, her mind racing to find something that she could use. It was a desperate and futile search, she knew, but focusing on the most remote of chances helped to hold back the painful words working their way through her skull. There was almost nothing nearby, nothing that she could use.
Books? No. A cup? No. Sheets of parchment? No.
She paused, dragging her eyes back to the discarded mug. The tea.
The tea!
Twilight's head jerked back around as she glared up into her former twin's mismatched eyes.
You poisoned me! There was something in the tea, something that you made me drink. That's why I couldn't cast my spells,
she shouted, and thrashed against the restraining hoof.
My memories are right. That's why my thoughts are so hazy, and why I'm dizzy. My memories are real. They have to be real. I know they're real. You're what's fake. You're nothing but a living lie.
The imposter just stared back down at the struggling Twilight, a look of false pity souring its features.
You're only hurting yourself by holding on to these delusions. These are not your friends.
It gestured at the other mares.
They are mine. This world is my world. This world is my life. It is not meant for some pony like you. This world rejects you.
The shadows began to deepen once again, an oily smudge spreading across the walls and ceiling of the library. Everything beyond the immediate vicinity was hidden behind an unnatural dusk. The imposter leaned in even closer, the powerful odor of rotting vegetation searing Twilight's nostrils.
You see, but you don't understand. This isn't your life. You are an invader here,
it said, lifting its eyes to watch the tendrils of shadow slither down the walls and across the floors.
This life rejects you because it knows what you are.
It paused, as if savouring the sight of the spreading darkness. Eventually, it returned its gaze to Twilight.
You're nothing but a virus. This reality is treating you like the infection you are and rejecting you before you can taint it further.
The dark sludge of liquid shadow spread across the floor like an animated ink spill. Twilight watched it approach with wide eyes. It was like looking into an expanding pool of nothingness. The black goop was insubstantial in every possible way, like a shadow. It existed in the absence of something. Yet she saw clearly that the ooze smeared itself over the windows, devouring the sunlight, and replacing it with darkness. She feared the shadows. Her bones turned to ice as it drew closer, her blood freezing in her veins. It was more than just a primal dislike of darkness and the uncertainty of what predators might lurk within. It was a threat that grew more terrible, more sinister the closer it drew. She feared its nothingness, the impossibility of its existence, the way it consumed everything around her. It was more horrifying than the bloodless gash of her doppelganger's smile, or the empty expressions of her friends' faces. And it was alive. There was a dark malevolence hidden within the spreading shadows. It was like a heartbeat that couldn't be heard, a faint rhythmic pulse at the back of her mind, at the corners of her vision, and hidden beneath the other sounds. She could sense it, watching her from the darkest pools with single-minded focus. At the furthest reaches of the library, she could just make out the indistinct outline of a pony wrapped in heavy garments. Where a head might be, there was a sharp protrusion, a porcelain blade shaped into the beak of some sort of bird of prey. Twilight blinked, and it vanished again. Her teary eyes drawn to the darkness that pulled at her friend's hooves. She glanced up at them, the last of her resistance crumbling as the disturbing living shadows inched closer.
Please, let me go. I don't want to be here anymore,
she begged, trying to break through their unseeing gaze, desperate to reach the friends she knew were trapped behind their vacant expressions.
Don't let it touch me.
I already offered you a chance to escape,
the other Twilight chuckled. Her friends' faces echoed her impostor, breaking into sinister smiles. The corner of their mouths began to stretch wider, tearing apart to reveal more and more teeth. Their flesh ran like wax under a hot flame, shifting with little rhyme or reason. The faces of her friends were lost as their bodies began to warm and boil, not slowing until every leering face bore the same sickening smile as her warped twin. Twilight was crying again. She gasped for air and quivered in abject terror as the darkness began to slide up her friends' legs. The bright colours of their coats were consumed as they were absorbed by the spreading shadows. It wiped away their cutie marks as it spread, obscuring everything beneath a layer of liquid night. None of them flinched as the insubstantial ooze rolled over their faces, filling their broken mouths and distended nostrils with the nothingness. Her friends were gone. Left in their place were 5 pony-shaped shadows. Silence reigned. The darkness, devouring everything, even noise. The only sounds were the moans of Twilight as she trembled in fear, trapped on a small island in a sea of disturbing nothingness. Twilight clenched her eyes tight, her face matted with sweat and snot and spittle and tears.
Please, I want to go home,
Twilight stammered, her voice echoing like thunder in the shadow-shrouded library.
I want to go home. Please.
Her impostor leaned down once again, its grin clearly visible, even as it too was consumed by shadow.
This world isn't yours. This world isn't yours,
it said, its chant taken up by the other figures around her.
This world isn't yours. This world isn't yours.
Please, make it stop. Make it stop,
she howled, her last vestiges of self-control snapping like dry twigs. Her anger and dedication and hope and convictions were abandoned in the face of her all-consuming fear. Her mind became a cauldron of mindless confusion. She blubbered pathetically as the shadows swarmed around her, talons of darkness clutching at her body. She was helpless. She was useless. Daggers of ice sliced at her flesh as they spread over her body, leaving behind a deep numbing sensation that masked everything but the pain. She cried out for salvation again and again, desperate for some kind of escape. It was more than just physical torture. It hurt her in every way she could possibly perceive. It was pain at every level. It was attacking her thoughts, her memories, and her character. It was not just ravishing her flesh, but her very sense of self. It was consuming everything that made up Twilight's sparkle. She opened her mouth to scream, and the shadows surged down her throat.
This world isn't yours.
Twilight jerked up as a scream tore free from her lips, her voice echoing back mockingly in the enveloping darkness. Confused and disorientated, she was operating on pure instinct. Her life was in danger. She had to do something. She had to fight. She had to escape. Overwhelmed by the surge of adrenaline pumping through her veins, she blindly leapt to her hooves, determined to free herself from the hungry shadows. Her forelegs missed the edge of the bed in the darkness, sending the unicorn tumbling forward. Her scream ended with a crack and a sharp oof as she slammed into the tiled floor, the impact knocking the wind out of her. Twilight gasped for air as she tried to lift herself up on trembling legs, the instinct still driving her actions. Her raw eyes darted around the lightless void. They were slow to pierce the inky veil, but she could tell that she was surrounded. Large shapes loomed over her in the darkness, figures wrapped in shadows.
Shadows!
Images of a spreading darkness brought with it a swell of desperate hysteria.
I have to get away from the shadows.
Twilight's hooves slipped and skid across the tiles as she pushed herself away from them, her back slamming up against the point of the wall that intersected her bed. Trapped. She was trapped again. The hungry nothingness was everywhere. Her fear was physical, leaving her flesh cold and oily. She wanted to scream out for help, but her lips flapped uselessly. She wanted to clench her eyes shut so that she didn't have to watch her gruesome fate. But they were frozen in panic, forcing her to stare helplessly at the darkness around her. The shadows remained where they were. Nothing moved to attack her. Slowly, the shapes around her began to resolve themselves, her eyes making out the bookshelves she had imagined as the remains of her consumed friends. The panic drained away as her mind slowly clawed its way to full consciousness, bringing with it coherent thought. She glanced down at herself, sobbing in relief, when she saw the proper shade of purple instead of the nothingness of the black void.
I'm safe. I'm okay. I'm safe. I'm okay,
she repeated to herself, putting as much force as she could behind the thoughts to drown out her body's instinctive call for action. The powerful urge to fight and escape throbbed in time with her heartbeat. Her body wound tight like an overdrawn bowstring. A small pool of light rested in the center of the floor, cast through the door's solitary window. She stared at it desperately as she focused on bringing her erratic breathing under control. The tension leaked out of her with every measured exhale, her fear passing from her mind as she took comfort from the small square of illumination.
It wasn't real. It was just a dream.
She slumped against the floor as her panic-fueled strength abandoned her. Without the adrenaline pumping through her bloodstream, her limbs were left feeling as though they were made of molasses and lead. Her muscles ached. It still stung where she had hit the floor. She was physically and mentally exhausted. Twilight shivered. She was also freezing. Her coat was matted with sweat, turning the cool recycled air into a subarctic gale as it passed over her damp body. Reaching out with an unsteady arm, she grabbed her discarded sheet and pulled it up to her chin. It was as wet as she was, but the cold blanket was better than none at all.
I'm safe,
she said aloud, her soft voice breaking the oppressive silence that hung over her.
It wasn't real. It was just...
Twilight's voice trailed off as the memories from her nightmare slowly seeped their way back into her mind, bringing with them an onslaught of images and thoughts she would much rather forget.
It was just a dream,
she finished in a whisper, closing her eyes softly.
Even my dreams aren't safe from this world.
Twilight's lips quivered as she cleaned her nose on her sheet. It wasn't just sweat that soiled her face. Her eyes were raw from unconscious crying.
Even my dreams hurt.
All you do is hurt ponies.
A cruel voice echoed from her memories, the words delivered by friends whose faces were twisted with hatred and scorn.
I don't help ponies. I don't heal ponies. I just cause pain.
The self-loathing returned unbidden, dragging blades of shame down her spine. Twilight stifled another sob, cradling her head in her hooves.
Oh, Celestia, please help me. Please, I need you.
She didn't trust herself to speak aloud, fearing what could happen if she were to verbalize her despair. She pictured the loving gaze of her mentor's warm face, clutching at it desperately to keep her from drowning in the black waters of her own fear.
Princess Celestia, I need you. I need help. Please.
The small unicorn hunched up into a small ball, wrapping her limbs around herself protectively. Warm tears trailed down her cheeks. She cried softly, the faint hiccups and whimpers barely echoing around the room. Silently, she continued to plead for a salvation that she feared might never come. Wow, that was a massive chapter. That pretty much was over double the rest of the chapters I've done. I am very sorry that this video came out late, and I'm going to stop apologising for it now, because I think I've done that about 3 times, and I feel like it might start annoying people. So, the whole reason for it was just because I've been trying to find a job, and at 8 o'clock this morning, I got a phone call from an agency saying, "Congratulations, you've been offered a job." So, I'm officially an engineer now. Well, not yet, I mean, when I start. But, yeah, unfortunately, more importantly, it's going to make this channel suffer a little bit because I'm not going to be around as much as I used to. So I will still be making content. I'm planning on going away from Asylum for a little bit, just taking a small break, and then coming back after, I don't know, a couple of weeks and seeing if I can try and pick up the storyline again. I might also see if I can do music tutorials, a couple of songs. I might even do impressions, things like that. Anything that I really want to. So I hope you guys still enjoy it. I also hope that this story freaked the crap out of you like it did with me the first time I heard it, because I really loved doing the voices, but it took so long to do some of it. I'm also sorry if some of the impressions kind of came out a little bit poorer at the end, because I went away from this and then came back after a fairly long time, so I had to try and pick up the voices again. So I'm sorry if they sound a little bit different, but fingers crossed they sound the same as they did before. So I'd like to say a big thank you to my 7 subscribers, everyone who has viewed these videos. I love you guys so much. Thank you to Demon of Decay, and a big up to my younger brother who played this fantastic music in the background. So until next time, stay shiny, guys.